everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Tonight we are going to make a shepherd's pie or cottage pie with some sourdough bread. I'm going to pop I've had it rising, I'm going to pop it in the oven in just a second. I have my Dutch oven preheated. It was in the oven at 500 degrees for the last hour, so it's very hot. I'm just going to score my loaf here. And then I'm going to give it just some nice design so that when it cooks it pops. Just like this. And then I'm going to take the lid off. Again, you want to heat your Dutch oven up in the oven at 500 degrees for an hour. That way it's nice and hot. And then I'm going to carefully place our loaf into my Dutch oven. I'm going to cover it back up, and then I'm going to have it cook for about 25 minutes at 500 degrees, and then we will take the lid off and have it cook and get a crust on it for another 15-20 minutes. So I'm going to pop this back in my oven at 500 degrees with the lid on for about 20 to 25 minutes. Set my timer. And now we are going to work on our cottage pie or shepherd's pie. It goes by a lot of different names, but essentially it's kind of like a stewed meat with mashed potatoes on the top. So we are going to start by peeling our potatoes and getting them boiling for our mashed potatoes. Let's get my peeler out.
You got a question? How do you get how do they get the recipe?
We're going to be making some cards and posting them, but we also post our videos, our live videos. We'll have them posted so you can always rewatch those. We're in the process of making some recipe cards. But again, we always post our live videos. You can find the link on our page. And that way you can just rewatch and cook along. So I'm going to be peeling up 4 large russet potatoes, which I'm going to chop up, and then we'll start boiling them for the mashed potato part. And essentially, a cottage pie or shepherd's pie is an Irish dish or an English dish, and it really is just a stewed meat. I do mine with like beef chunks. You can do it with ground beef as well, and I kind of stew it with some carrots, onions, mushrooms, and spices. And then I add some mashed potatoes on the top of it and just bake it for a few minutes after that. So it kind of looks like a little pie. And so tonight I'm doing it with beef chunks. I do sometimes make it with ground beef as well, but I use a slightly different seasonings in that.
And someone's asking about the bread recipe, the sourdough.
Yes, the sourdough recipe. I have actually several videos of that posted already. But that's a really simple recipe to use. It's essentially 100 grams of sourdough starter, starter, and then 375 grams of warm water, about 2 teaspoons of salt, and 500 grams of flour. And then you mix those together, and then you fold it into each other. And for about 2 hours straight, every 30 minutes, you fold it about 4 or 5 times, and then you let it rise for about 6 to 8 hours. And then you put it in your banneton, and then you pop it in the fridge for anywhere between 6 to 48 hours until you're ready to bake it. So sourdough doesn't use yeast; has naturally occurring yeast in it, and it's a really simple recipe, but it does take time. There's a lot of resting time. So if I want to have sourdough bread, it's going to be about 2 days before I can actually eat it. But it's very little work. It's just a lot of resting.
And then you got a question, is there a recipe for the starter?
Yes, I do. I have recipe posted. It takes about a week to make your starter, give or take. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer because you need to wait until your starter has a really good ferment on it, and that can be impacted by how hot or cold your kitchen is. But it's about a week of fermenting the flour with water, equal parts flour and water. I do have that posted on videos as well. But I think my base that I start out with is like 150 grams unbleached flour with 150 grams of water, and you mix those together and you leave them out on the counter to ferment with just like a cheesecloth over the top of it. And you just feed it every single day. And in about a week or so, you have it completely fermented so that you can make a loaf of bread. But again, sometimes it takes a little bit longer than a week to get a good fermentation on it. And then I use a lot of the discards. I used to have a ton of recipes posted for discards as well, like biscuits, muffins, scones, crackers. That way none of it's going to waste. There we go. I'm gonna chop up these potatoes as well. I'm trying to make them all fairly smaller, not a huge chunk. I know some people who will just quarter their potatoes and cut it up, but I want mine to cook up faster. So the smaller you cut your potatoes, the faster they will cook. You just have to keep an eye on them, because if you overcook your potatoes or you overboil them, they'll just disintegrate and kind of turn into mush. And so you want to make sure that you cook them well, but they're not overcooked. I once forgot about mashed potatoes. I was boiling and I forgot about them, and I came back like an hour later and there was no potatoes left. It was just mushy water. So moral of the story, don't forget about them. And then I try to keep them as close in size as possible so that they all kind of cook up around the same time. And for this recipe, I'm using russet because I think russet makes a nicer, fluffier potato. If I'm making a stew, I'll use a gold potato or a red potato because they are a bit waxier, which means they hold together better in a soup or a stew. Okay, I'm gonna add these. I had my water starting to warm up. I'm gonna add my potatoes to it. If I was just doing straight up mashed potatoes as a side, I would start with cold water, and then I would put all my potatoes in and then rinse out the starch. So I put them in the potatoes in there, then dump all the water out and then refill it up. That will give you the fluffiest mashed potatoes. But since this is gonna be going on my cottage pie, I don't need to do that step. But I will give it a quick stir. But you see the white foamy stuff at the top? That's actually potato starch. There we go. And now those can start cooking, and we're gonna work on our cottage pie base. So I'm gonna start by chopping up one yellow onion. You could use also a Valdalia onion or a sweet onion. I would avoid using a red onion or white onions. Red onions are better eaten like raw on burgers or in like a pickled salad. And the same thing with white onions. Those are better in salsas. They've got more of a kick, but they don't have as nice of a flavor when they are cooked. And I'm just gonna chop this guy up into just like a medium-sized dice. Not too, I don't want it too large, but it doesn't also need to be too small. Give it a nice chop. And I'm gonna turn on my Dutch oven. I'm gonna add a little bit of olive oil. Let that heat up. While that's heating up, I'm gonna grab some garlic out of my fridge. I'm just gonna be using minced garlic instead of fresh garlic. Because I think trying to peel fresh garlic is a pain. But let me reach in here. My garlic is all the way back in the back of my fridge. There we go. But you could definitely use fresh garlic if you wanted to. But I feel this gives you just as much kick. You might use a little bit more than if you were using straight up fresh. I'm gonna use about a full teaspoon. I'm gonna pop it in here. And then I'm gonna add my onions. And these can start sauteing up. There we go. And then, while those are sauteing, I'm gonna get out I have some stew meat, but I'm gonna just chop it up a little bit bigger. Costco stew meat comes the chunks are fairly big. But if you don't want to buy stew meat, you could just buy chuck roast and chop that up small. But I find stew meat works well, and it's a little bit cheaper than a straight up chuck roast. It has just various different cuts of meat in it. And I'm not going to use all of this, it's quite a bit. But I do want them to be a bit smaller than what we have here. So I'll package that up and save it. And I'm going to use a cleaver. If you've never seen a cleaver before, this is a cleaver. This is what they use in horror movies, but it's actually really good for cutting up meat. It allows you to put a little bit more force behind the blade and it cuts through. It makes cutting up raw meat 10 times easier than using like a standard chef's knife. So I'm gonna just cut my chunks of meat into about, I would say, like 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch piece. Just so they'll get tendered up and aren't too big, because again, you want to think about what you're eating in a spoonful. And while I'm chopping these, you can see I'm going to give my thing a quick stir, because I don't want my garlic to burn, so I want to mix it up and coat my onions all the way. Again, if you're going to just buy regular roast, chuck roast is the best. There's a lot of marbled fat in a chuck roast, so it makes for a really tender meat, especially when cooked up and stewed. So that is always a good cut to use. But I find Costco has really good prices for their stew meat, so I just grabbed that. And we're just going to chop all of these up into nice bite-sized pieces. So it's funny, growing up, we always had, my mom called it shepherd's pie, and it was always made with like ground beef that was seasoned with garlic, rosemary, and a bay leaf, and with mashed potatoes on top. So a really simple, basic meal. During COVID, we used to get these snack boxes. I think they were called like Yum boxes or Yum crates. But one time we had Ireland as our country, and they had a recipe for cottage pie, which is where I learned, this is the recipe I used and adapted from it. But it used chunked meat, and you kind of make a little bit of like a gravy with it. And it was like an instant hit. All of my kids loved it, and it was pretty simple to make and delicious. And they prefer it better than the shepherd's pie that I had grown up. I still have fond memories of that shepherd's pie, but I do think this one's a little bit nicer. But this would be something you would definitely find in a pub somewhere in Ireland. But most of my recipes I find are influenced by something I had during my childhood, or like traveling, or some sort of experience like that. I felt like when you travel, you try a lot more things than you normally would, and it like opens your horizons and, you know, allows you to try new things that you wouldn't necessarily. And when we were on our cruise over Christmas, I always was like, oh, let's go to all the ethnic places, let's eat all of, you know, I want all the Indian food, all the things, because my kids don't really like that. But I made them try everything, and they actually liked more than they thought. Okay, now that I've got all my meat chopped up fairly nice into nice bite-sized pieces, perfect. Put my cleaver, because I'm all done with that. I'm going to give my onions a nice stir. Perfect. I'm going to turn down my heat just a pinch. And then we're going to add in our stew meat. Perfect. Nice. I'm going to put my cookbook or thing over, wash my hands. Now I'm going to give this a good stir. Mix it up. My point is that I'm not necessarily cooking it all the way through. I'm wanting to brown it really nice, and then we're going to add some seasonings to it. So we'll start there. We're going to be using, let me see. We're going to be using Well, first we're gonna season the dry meat with some bay leaves, black pepper, and garlic salt. Then we're gonna go in with some bouillon, and we'll add a little bit of, when we add the liquid, we're gonna add some Worcestershire, which has some acidity to it, which will make it nice and tender. A little bit of kitchen bouquet, which will give a nice seasoning to the gravy, and then of course some water and some beef bouillon. So this nice stir. And I'm going to break up 2 bay leaves. And I'm gonna kind of crush them up into the meat so that they can really let out their aromatic flavors. And then I'm gonna give a nice sprinkling of black pepper. It'll probably be about a half a teaspoon. And a nice sprinkling of garlic salt. You could add in rosemary if you wanted, but we just had rosemary crackers the other day, and so I used up all of my rosemary, and I need to get some more. Also, thyme works really well with this. If you wanted to add thyme, you can just kind of choose which seasonings you want to go with. I'm just going with more of a basic seasoning today. And while that's sauteing up, we're gonna peel our carrots and chop them up.
You want to just give a recap of what you're making tonight?
Yes, so I popped in a sourdough loaf into the oven that we had proofing in my fridge for the last day and a half. And then we are making a cottage pie. So I've chopped up 4 big russet potatoes, and I have them boiling over here. You can see all the potato starch has come up to the top. But then we're gonna boil them, and we'll turn them into a mash. Then I have some onions, garlic, and beef stew meat sauteing in my Dutch oven. And essentially what we'll do is we'll add some carrots and some mushrooms and some more seasonings. And we're gonna make a nice little stew that we will kind of cover with the mashed potatoes and pop in the oven. It's called a cottage pie or a shepherd's pie. Kind of goes by both names. But it's just a really traditional, like Irish or British meal. You definitely find it in a pub, but it's definitely got that homey feel, and it's delicious, and my kids love it. So that's just another take, I would say, take on how you can do beef stew or beef roast. I think last Sunday we made beef bourguignon. We typically kind of do a roast or a beef something every Sunday, I've realized. But it's a meal that it doesn't take too much prep. There's, but it's good, has nice flavors, and it's one that tastes great, like as leftovers. I find that stews, my water's boiling over here, so I'll just turn it down a little bit. And here's the trick. I'm gonna get some of that potato starch off the top. That traps in the heat. There we go. Nice. I'm actually going to be using some of my potato starch water with my bouillon. It will add a little bit of thickness to our stew. And I'll peel my last one up, and then we're going to do a simple dice on these as well. So I'm going to chop off the ends. And you could also use pre-cut carrots if you wanted, or baby carrots. I just buy my carrots in bulk from Costco, and so we always have these lying around. So I'm just going to do a simple, thin, not too thick, kind of cut through. These are all fairly small carrots. If I had a bigger one, I would either halve or quarter them, because I want my carrots to cook uniformly. There we go. And just 2 more left. I will say, if you're new to cooking, you might find that you're very slow at the prep, but that just gets faster with time. Once you get more comfortable using knives and just with the kitchen in general, things go a lot faster. There we go. I'm gonna give my carrots a nice stir. And then we're going to chop up some mushrooms. I'm just using white button mushrooms, but you could also use, portobello, baby bellas if you wanted to. All of those are great ones. I find that shiitake aren't actually as great with a stew, but those are better with more like a stir fry. And I'm just gonna give them a basic slice. I chopped these 1 in half because it's a fairly large mushroom.
You got a question? Are you making beef stew?
I am making shepherd's pie, or also known as cottage pie. So it's kind of similar to a beef stew. It's essentially, we're gonna make a stew with the meat, but it's gonna have just a little bit of broth, kind of gravy on it. And then we cover it with mashed potatoes, and we will pop it in the oven for a few minutes and to let the potatoes kind of crisp up. And so it's very similar to a beef stew, but it's actually called a cottage pie or a shepherd's pie. A very common dish in like Ireland, the United Kingdom. Meal you could definitely find at a pub there. When I was in Ireland, they definitely served it at pubs there. It's an easy meal to make a lot of, and also keeps well. Like, this reheats really well. I'm gonna add in my mushrooms. Perfect. And then I'm gonna give it a quick stir. Let those start sauteing up. And then...
You got a question. Do you have to simmer the meat to make it tender?
This is going to be kind of simmering in the... I cut them smaller so they'll get tender faster. If you leave big chunks, you'd need to simmer them longer. But it's going to simmer in its like a broth juice that I'm going to make. And then when we pop it in the oven, it will also cook for a little bit longer. So I typically cut my meats that I'm not going to stew for at least an hour into smaller bites. And then they get a lot tender more quickly. There we go. Give it a good stir. And then I am going to get a measuring cup out, and we're going to use some of our potato water to make our bouillon. I'll get a spoon. And so I'm using my potato water because it has a bit of starch in it, which will help thicken up my broth for my kind of gravy for my meat. And it will help for the bouillon to kind of stick together. It's a similar how you can use pasta water when you are cooking your pasta to help thicken up your sauce. It just has the, you can see it's cloudy, that's the potato starch. And I'm gonna use about 4 cups, which is why I added a lot of water to my mashed potatoes, because I wanted to use this to make my kind of gravy for it. So I have that. And then I'm gonna mix in a big heaping spoonful of beef bouillon. This is gonna help give a nice flavor to our bouillon, or to our broth. You could use beef broth. I just find then you have to use a lot more salt, and doesn't quite have as much flavor as if you were just to use bouillon. Give it a good stir. And I'm gonna put in some Worcestershire sauce, which is kind of like a seasoned vinegar, I will say. About, I wouldn't say a tablespoon or so. This is gonna kind of make the meat extra tender. It has the acidity in it that will kind of cut through the fat in the meat to make it really tender. And then I'm gonna use some kitchen bouquet. This is like a browning seasoning. It has, it's kind of like a reduction of vegetable broth, but it adds a really nice flavor and coloring to the gravy, or to the, I will say, kind of the gravy that it's on. You see it made my brown a lot richer. I use this in a lot of gravies that I'm making, and I think you can find it in like the condiment aisle. Okay, now that we have these sauteing up, Turn my heat up a little bit, and then I'm gonna get some flour, and we're gonna sprinkle some flour over it. Got it right over here. And essentially, this flour is gonna act as our thickener and thicken up our broth into a nice gravy. So I'm gonna start by sprinkling it over as if it was, the flour was snowing on it. You're gonna use about like 1/4 of a cup of flour, but you don't wanna pour it all at once. You wanna pour it on and then stir it in to really coat it. If you dump it in all at once, you're more likely to get it to congeal into a ball, and then you'll just have like what I would consider like a dumpling in your soup versus a nice thick gravy. So I'm just pouring a little bit of it in, and then I will add some more. There we go. And then you can also add peas to this if you wanted, but my family does not really care for peas. I love peas, but my husband and my children do not. There we go.
You get a question. What's the name of the jar? I'm not sure which one. You want to go over the last couple things?
So this is Worcestershire sauce, which is essentially like a seasoned vinegar. And then we have Kitchen Bouquet, which is a browning, liquid browning sauce. And I think, and then we had the Better Than Beef bouillon. And now we see in here my meat has come to a nice thickened up. Now we're gonna add our broth, and then it will be time for us to take the lid off of our sourdough. I can hear it beeping over there. So I'm gonna add a little bit at a time. There we go. I'm gonna get a little bit right now, let it thicken up, and then we'll go take the lid off of our sourdough, and then we'll add some more broth. There we go. Let me get my oven mitts on. And I'm gonna get a trivet out here for me to put the lid on because it will be quite hot. Okay, I hear you. I will say my beeper on my oven incessantly beeps. So here, I'm gonna pull it out. I'll show you guys. This is when you bake it in there, you see how it's risen nicely. Now we're gonna just bake it. I'm gonna turn my temperature down to about 450, and we're gonna bake for about 15 more minutes or until we have a nice color on it. So I'm gonna put 15 minutes with the lid off, and that way it gets a nice golden crust on it. The reason why we bake it with the lid on is it seals in all the moisture, so you have a nice moist bread. There we go. Stir this. I might not need all of this broth. I think I could have done with just 3 cups. You just want enough to kind of cover your meat, but not too much. Perfect. And then I'm gonna give it a quick taste to see if we need to add any more seasonings to it. Perfect. It has a nice beefy taste. I ended up only using 3 of my 2.5 of my things. I kind of eyeballed it. If I had had more meat in there, then I would definitely need more. But again, most of my recipes I just eyeball, and you feel after you've been cooking for a while, you begin to feel it. Let's check the potatoes and see if they are ready to whip up. The way I check my potatoes is when I know they're ready to be whipped, I'm just gonna get out a spoon, pull them up, and then I'm gonna think if my fork goes through them easily like this, that means they are ready to whip up, which is perfect. That's just an easy way you can check. So I'm gonna turn the heat off on my things. I'm gonna let this simmer over here. And we're gonna strain this and make them into a nice mashed potatoes. So I've got my heat off. And you could also use a bigger colander. I'm just gonna literally drain it in here and flip it in there, or you could use the lid to your pan if you wanted to. That just can get a little bit of hot. So I'm just gonna pour it over here. Shake out all of the excess water because we want to have nice, creamy, buttery mashed potatoes and not runny. There we go. And then I just whip mine up in my pot. So I'm going to be putting in, we have 4 large potatoes, so I'm going to start with a stick of butter, and then I'll see if it needs some more. I'll test. I like to stick it all the way in there and cover it up.
You got a question? Where do you learn cooking?
Honestly, I just learned it through the years, just practicing and cooking. I used to cook all the dinners at my house growing up. That was my chore, and I'm the youngest of 10 kids, and so when I was 13, I took over cooking, and I just learned from there. We had, when we originally moved from Iowa to Tennessee, we had a cook for a couple of years, and then I just decided to take over it, and I cooked there. And then my parents, who were academics, hosted lots of dinner parties, so we would have chefs from around the town come and cook these meals, and I was always, I'm sure they hated me, but I was always in the kitchen bothering them, learning everything I could from them. And then I had like subscriptions to Fine Cooking Magazine and Gourmet, and I watched lots of cooking shows. So it's just self-taught, and I've learned over the years.
Good question. Which one of your siblings likes your food the most?
I would say my sister. I would say my sister, who's just older than me. She's like 5 years older than me. She actually came to live with my parents last year for about 6 months as she was switching jobs, and she came over to my house almost every single night to eat dinner. So I would say she probably likes it the most because she hates cooking herself. But it's hard to tell. I think a lot of us really enjoy cooking. My brother's wife has celiac disease, and he happens to be an organic chemist. And so he enjoys like the chemistry part of cooking. And that's kind of like fun for him. So for those, I put in about, I want to say, a 1/3 cup of heavy cream and a little bit of salt, probably like a tablespoon of salt to begin with. And I'm going to whip these up, and then I'll see if I need to add any more. I can already tell there are more, I'm going to add some more butter and some more cream, because if you look at them, they're still a little dry. And that really just depends. Sometimes you don't need as much butter and cream, but if your potatoes are really starchy, they'll absorb a lot more. And these are really big. They were huge potatoes. They're probably more closer to 8. And we like our potatoes just to be a little bit more fluffy. I'll just use, I don't have much left in here. And I'm gonna push it down and whip it up nice. There we go. Give it a good whip. And one thing that's nice is if your potatoes were cooked all the way through, they're really easy to whip up. I am going to take a taste to see if they need any more salt. Nope, perfect. And this is the fun part. This is, we're gonna literally take this mashed potatoes, and we're just going to scoop it on top of our stew here, and we'll pop it in the oven. So I'm gonna give it one big stir. I'm gonna turn off the heat. And you kind of just scoop your mashed potatoes over, kind of like it's like the top of a pie crust. And what you'll do is when you put it in the oven, it will get a nice crisp top on it. Beautiful. And that way, when you have it, when you bite into it, you're gonna have a nice mashed potatoes with your kind of stewed beef all over it, and then the kind of the broth makes a lovely gravy. There we go. And if you want it to be really professional, you could get out a pastry bag and you could pipe your mashed potatoes onto it, but who has the time for that? I've seen it done in, like, you can get little mini dishes and you can make individual ones. I have like mini Dutch ovens where you could put your stew in and then you pipe on your mashed potatoes. I will say it always uses more mashed potatoes than you think. That's why I made a good amount of mashed potatoes to cover up. But they're delicious. And I also say this is great reheated because stewed meat always tastes good days later. And with the mashed potatoes, like a lot of times mashed potatoes not as great the next day, but because there's this like lovely stew gravy, it keeps it nice and moist. Okay, I've got all my mashed potatoes on here. Beautiful. I'm just gonna put this in here. And now I'm just going to cut just a small pat of butter, and I kind of put it right on the top. And it will melt over, and we're gonna pop this in the oven with our shepherd's pie. Or not our shepherd's pie, with our sourdough bread. We were popping our shepherd's pie in here. And I'm gonna be using my oven mitts because the Dutch oven retains a lot of heat, so these handles will be hot, even though you cooked it on the stove. You can see our bread, it's got a nice crisping up. So I'm gonna slide this over here, and we're gonna let that cook. There's about 5 minutes left, so now we are going to prep our strawberries because I always serve a fresh fruit with dinner. This is just a great way to get some fresh fruit in our kids. I'll put it right here. I'm gonna get a bowl out. And I'll give them a quick rinse. But I find in the winter strawberries aren't as nice as in the spring/summer. So when I chop them up, I toss them with a little bit of sugar, and that brings out their natural sweetness. You really don't need much sugar. It's about a teaspoon or so of sugar for a good amount. But it really enhances the sweetness of the strawberry and their natural flavors, especially during the winter when strawberries can be kind of bland or have, like, you see how it's really white on the inside? That just means they didn't really ripen up well. But my kids love strawberries even when they're not in season, so we always have them, but this is the way. In the summer, they'll eat them just fresh, perfect, because they are so much sweeter and more flavorful. But just a pinch of sugar, or as Mary Poppins says, a spoonful of sugar, that was a bad one, makes the medicine go down. So we'll cut these up, and by the time I get these cut up and tossed, the rest of our dinner should be finished. For those of you who joined us later, we made, I popped a sourdough loaf in the bread. I had that proofing in my fridge 2 days ago. I was gonna bake it yesterday, but we were all under the weather. And luckily that can proof in your fridge for up to 48 hours. And then we made a yummy cottage pie, which is essentially we sauteed up some onions, beef stew meat, and carrots and garlic and mushrooms. And then we made a nice gravy using beef bouillon, kitchen bouquet, and some Worcestershire sauce. And a little bit of flour, and that thickened up. And then we coat our mashed potatoes on top of our stewed meat, and you bake it for just a few minutes to get a nice crispy potato crust on the top. And it will be ready to serve with our sourdough that is just about to come out. So I've got I think this will be enough. I'll save these for breakfast tomorrow. And then what I do is really just, see, we've got a nice toss of sugar. You really don't need a lot. It's hardly any, but it will give just a nice, it brings out the strawberry flavor. You're not sugaring it as much as you would with a strawberry shortcake, where you want to have a nice juicy strawberry like liquid out of it. This is just enough to bring out, enhance the natural sweetness. There we go. And these will be perfect to go with our dinner. And sometimes we will, if we do our fruit as our dessert, we'll pair it with some whipped cream. Okay, I think our stuff is about to come out, so I'm just gonna clear this off real quick so we have a nice spot to put it. But it's a fairly easy meal that you can cook on a Sunday, and it doesn't take, I mean, I think we've got it done in less than an hour, which are kind of always my goal. I try to make sure, you know, dinners are between 30 minutes and an hour. That way we can have home cooked meals every single night. Luckily, our weekends aren't quite as busy, so we don't need as much, I don't have to be as quick on it. But during the week, I posted several videos on there, but of the meals we cook, and I try to aim for them to be around 30 minutes. I'm gonna give this a quick wipe, and then we'll take our stuff out of the oven. There we go. And then I'm gonna need my trivets. I know I heard that you could put your hot stuff down directly on quartz countertops, but I'm always too afraid to do it. Okay, let's go get those bad guys out of the oven. Remember, always use oven mitts. Make sure you have good oven mitts. I used to have oven mitts that had little holes in it. Oh, look, I got a bubble over. Here we go. We've got our shepherd's pie. This one bubbled up fast. But there's the gravy on it. And now we'll get our bread out. Beautiful. Okay, let me turn off my oven and we'll get a nice serving of our shepherd's pie. I think I may have put just a pinch too much gravy in there, or my pot wasn't high enough, but it's still gonna taste delicious no matter what. I always say flavor over beauty. So you essentially, we're just gonna cut down in here and I pull up, you're gonna see all this nice gravy kind of fall to the side. And there we have our nice beefy chunks on the bottom. Beautiful. So this is our shepherd's pie. And then this guy's gonna be nice and hot. I'm not gonna cut into him yet because we want to wait until he is cooled down. But I want you guys to show nice, beautiful crusts are there, popped. But this is our sourdough bread, and we'll just slice it up, spread some butter on it, and we'll dip it in our gravy. And then we'll have some fresh strawberries with it. Well, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for joining us. We try to have live cooking every single day, but we enjoy all the comments you have, messages for any recipes that you would like. Again, thanks for joining us here today.